Lew Rockwell, thanks for holding while I put that call out for the money bomb. But can you comment about the fact that we get to be hesitant and have been buffaloed into not asking for support, but we need to learn how to do that?
Well, the bad guys, of course, are all supported by the tax system, by stolen money, in other words. That's what taxes are. It's a coercive mechanism whereby people in the government get to put a gun to your head and say, hand us some percentage of of what you've got in your wallet, or otherwise we're going to send you to jail. So we're supposed to, of course, think that is a morally higher way of getting money than the private way. So whether it's in commerce or whether it's in charities, whether it's a matter of gifts or whether you're purchasing something, this, of course, is the voluntary and the humane and the prosperous and the free way to get money. So, of course, that's the way it ought to be done, not through the government mechanism.
Absolutely, and the establishment knows that. They're scared to death that real organizations are going to get funded, that we make films and sell books, that Ron Paul does it or has newsletters. I mean, that is such a psyop to say no one who's against big government is allowed to fund their operations. What a mind game, Lou.
And, you know, Alex, I was so glad to hear you mention Ron's forthcoming book, End the Fed, which is really an extraordinary work. I mean, I got a chance to see a proof. It's just an extraordinary piece of work. What Ron does is he weaves history and economics and the Constitution, and together with his own life experiences from the time he was a little boy to today on Capitol Hill, and talks about money, about the Federal Reserve, about the kind of system we ought to have as versus the horrible system we do have. It's an extraordinary book. I think it's going to be a bestseller, and I think it's going to really help the End the Fed movement.
Well, I had Congressman Paul on yesterday, graciously in his busy schedule, and I made the point that even if they shoot this down and play dirty tricks, and CNBC is saying Fed would be shut down if it were audited, experts say society would collapse, they're saying on other news programs. I mean, obviously they may pull chicanery and beat it this time, but the idea of this alien, offshore, above the law, arrogant group that's engineered the crisis we're under, now posing as our saviors, no matter what they do, it's inexorable that their days are numbered.
Well, you know, it's important to remember that, and of course there are many evil institutions in Washington, D.C., whether it's the IRS or the EPA or the HUD or the rest of the alphabet from hell, or the Pentagon and all the rest of them. But the worst thing in Washington, the worst operation that goes on there is the Federal Reserve. It is the Federal Reserve that makes possible this biggest government in the history of the world, the U.S. government. It's the Federal Reserve that makes possible world wars. It's the Federal Reserve that makes possible all the crazy environmental stuff that they're engineering now. Without a Federal Reserve, they wouldn't be talking about socializing medical care.
Okay, it's the brain, the heart. It's the brain, the heart, the stomach, everything. And the IRS is the mouth feeding it. Go ahead.
Well, it's the Fed that makes possible. It's this printing press, and we can think of the Fed as being nothing other than a counterfeiting press. It's like the counterfeiter in the basement in a local town hurting the local economy with its phony money. Only global. I mean, it's on a global scale. They put out trillions of dollars of money just created out of thin air, and of course, it benefits the government itself. It benefits the big banks, the military-industrial complex, all the rest of the people associated with the central state in Washington, at the expense of the American people, and really the people of the whole world end up paying for this. And it's a rip-off. It's a transfer of funds from poor people, elderly people, rural people, other groups that aren't blessed in our society, to the most powerful and the richest people connected to the government. Its predecessor was called by Andrew Jackson the monster. And I always think that's a good phrase for the Federal Reserve, too. I mean, it causes the business cycle. It's because of the Federal Reserve that we now have this horrific financial crisis we're in. They caused the artificial boom. They caused the housing boom. They caused the dot-com boom. They caused the Great Depression. Ever since the Federal Reserve was established in 1913, it's caused a huge series of booms and busts. And of course, you can't really tell how much poorer we are because of the Federal Reserve and its ability to pump up the government and cause these booms and busts. But we're probably 2 or 3 times poorer at a very, very conservative estimate. Every American, we would all be a much richer society if it weren't for the group of criminals called the Federal Reserve System.
Absolutely. Expanding on that, You, of course, run the Ludwig von Mises Institute, full of top world-renowned economists, people that research this. But just studying basic history, it's not even a hidden fact that we didn't really have a business cycle. It was explosive, 10% growth on average, completely stable money, absolute milk and honey. 4% of the world's population got half the wealth of the world. 80+% of the patents. Just huge levels of high education from homeschooling. The apple of the world's eye. Then colonized by the Federal Reserve. Takeover in 1913. They engineered the 33 collapse. War Powers Act. They brag in IMF and World Bank documents and 100-year-old American Banking Association documents that we have, that they love booms and bust to get you inflated and blow it out and consolidate. This is a predatory group of shysters, of magicians engaging in scams and chicanery who bamboozle and scam the public into getting into debt, into living in this false reality. And now we're several generations deeply under their domestication, and they are fully trying to domesticate us now. And I guess we've now reached that critical juncture, that crossroads towards great liberty or towards total tyranny. And their whole patriot system, the whole Homeland Security apparatus we discovered from the documents we broke is for veterans, gun owners, conservatives, Ron Paul, libertarians, yourself, myself. I mean, we now know this offshore alien corporation is setting up and preparing to make war upon the American people if we try to ever kick the bankers out or bring them to justice. Lew Rockwell.
Well, Alex, I think that Ron Paul ignited a prairie fire against the Federal Reserve in his presidential campaign. And I think back to his speech after the Dearborn, in October 2007, the Dearborn Republican primary debate. He went to the University of Michigan afterwards. And there were about 4,000 kids in the quad there to hear him, a lot of kids to hear a politician, we were told. And so Ron starts talking about foreign policy, about the free market. Everybody's cheering him. And then all of a sudden, he starts talking about monetary policy. And kids in one corner of the quad start chanting, "End the Fed, end the Fed." And soon the whole 4,000 is chanting it. And some of these kids are lighting dollar bills and holding them up as if to say, "Here's to you, Bernanke." And it was an electrifying moment. And I trace the entire current anti-Fed movement and its size, its excitement, and its possibilities to that moment in the quad of the University of Michigan when these kids responded to Ron Paul. And I'll tell you, it bothers the Fed. There was a great article, it's sort of the opposite, bad article, but great from our standpoint, in Forbes, where they said, look, it's time for the Fed to be boring again. People should not be interested in the Fed. They can't do their wonderful work for humanity if they're being scrutinized. So Ron Paul's bill to audit the Fed is terrible. All interest in the Fed, but except by professional economists, should be discouraged. Well, of course, Fed is not boring, although they'd like us to think it's boring, because they're ripping us off. And Ron Paul is the engine of this movement that has just swept the country, and I see instances of it all over the world, as a matter of fact, where people want to know about the Fed, want transparency, and the ones who really understand the Fed, and I want to mention a great book by Thomas Woods of the Mises Institute called Meltdown about this recent crisis. Another great.
We're going to be having him on.
Yeah, no, I know that, and so this is another great book to read. But there is a strong anti-Fed movement. It's getting stronger. Whatever these birds do in Congress is not the heart of it. The heart of it is among the American people. They're scared at the Fed. They've hired a lobbyist to try to block Ron Paul. You have Bernanke going on 60 Minutes twice. Never in the history of the Fed has a Fed chairman appeared on a regular media show like that.
Lou, I want to ask you this, and I agree with you. This is going to backfire, and they've gone from their arrogant above the Congress to scared, that air of invincibility, that air of arrogance, that veneer of royalty has now left them. People are realizing they're not invincible. So let's talk Turkey. How are they going to counter us? And their answer is, same way they got the banker takeover October 3rd, we're going to have a depression if you audit us, and you're white supremacist if you do. That's why they've seized on this von Brunn deranged person. You've got, in polls, the Fed is 60-70% unpopular. I guess 70% of Americans are white supremacists. I think that's going to backfire on them as well.
Well, I think that just the fact that Americans are learning what this institution does, that it's not just a name on the bill in your pocket, but it's actually the greatest rip-off engine in the history of the world, working against us every day. As people get interested in it, they begin to understand it. They want to abolish it. It's unconstitutional. It's immoral. It's bad politically. It's hurtful in every way.
All right, he's the head of the Ludwig von Mises Institute, and he is a best-selling author in his own right, and also the former congressional chief of staff for Ron Paul, Lew Rockwell. Always love having him. Stay there, Lew. We'll be right back and talk about the game plan, how we beat the bankers, how we bring them down, how we end the Fed.